I want you to think about one person. Not just anyone. That person. The one whose name still lands differently in your chest. When someone says it unexpectedly. The one you thought, this is it. The one you rearranged your life for. Quietly, willingly, without being asked. Maybe it ended loudly. With things said that couldn't be unsaid. Maybe it ended quietly. With a silence that just kept going. Until one day you realized. It had become permanent. Either way, when it was over, you weren't just heartbroken. You were different. And I don't mean different in the poetic. I came out stronger way. That people post about on the internet. I mean different in the way. Where certain songs became off limits. Where you flinched at things that used to make you smile. Where some part of you, a part you're still not sure you got back, went very, very quiet. Tonight I want to talk about that relationship. Not to reopen the wound, but because I think it was saying something to you. That the pain was too loud to hear. Here's what I believe. And stay with me because this might feel wrong at first. The relationship that hurt you the most wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't even the wrong person at the wrong time. Though it may have been that too. It was a teacher. And not the gentle kind. The kind that doesn't explain the lesson. Until you've already lived through the exam. By the end of tonight, I want to show you exactly what it was teaching you. Not in a way that minimizes the pain, but in a way that finally makes it mean something. There's a specific kind of aftermath that nobody talks about honestly. Not the crying, not the sleepless nights, not even the anger, which, honestly, is easier. Anger has energy, anger moves. I'm talking about the flatness that comes after. The weeks, maybe months, where you went through every day completely normally. Woke up, made coffee, answered messages, laughed at things, and felt absolutely nothing. Like someone had turned the volume down on life. And you couldn't find the dial. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it emotional numbing. The mind's way of protecting you from processing more than it can handle at once. But here's what's interesting about that flatness. It isn't emptiness. It looks like emptiness. It feels like emptiness. But underneath it, underneath all that gray, muffled quiet, something is actually happening. The mind is sorting, reorganizing, quietly dismantling beliefs you didn't even know you held, and trying to figure out what to build in their place. Think of it like a city after a storm. From above, it just looks like damage. But on the ground, people are already clearing debris, assessing what held, discovering which foundations were always weak, and which ones were stronger than anyone thought. You were doing that work. You are doing that work. Even if it doesn't feel like work. Even if it just feels like surviving. But here's the question that actually matters. What did the storm reveal? Because here's the thing about painful relationships. They don't just break things. They expose things. And what they expose is almost always something that was already there. Hidden, waiting, asking to be seen. I want to talk about 4 things that relationship was exposing. 4 lessons dressed as pain. And the first one is the one nobody wants to hear. When a relationship ends painfully, our first instinct is to look outward. What did they do wrong? Why weren't they enough? How could they have treated me that way? And sometimes, often, those questions are fair. Some people genuinely behave badly. Some situations are genuinely unjust. I'm not here to excuse what was done to you. But I want to ask you a different question. What did you keep accepting? Not what happened to you, but what you allowed to continue. What you explained away. What you told yourself was fine, when some quiet part of you knew it wasn't. Because here's what I've come to believe. After thinking about this for a long time, we don't stay in painful situations because we're weak. We stay because those situations are meeting a need, often a need we've never fully named. Maybe it was the night to feel chosen, to have someone look at you and decide, yes, you, even if the way they showed it was inconsistent, even if you had to earn it over and over. Maybe it was the night to feel knighted, to be so important to someone that they couldn't function without you, even if that dynamic slowly eroded your sense of self. Maybe it was the night to prove something, that you were lovable enough, patient enough, good enough to make it work. None of these needs are shameful. They're human, deeply, completely human. But the relationship was showing you that you were trying to fill them from the outside, from someone else's hands. And the lesson, the hard, necessary lesson, is that needs that deep can only be answered from within. That's not a self-help slogan. That's the actual work. The work of figuring out, what am I really hungry for? And why have I been asking the wrong people to feed me? But that's only the first layer. Because even if you do that work, even if you understand what you needed and why you stayed, there's still something deeper underneath. Something that relationship was reflecting back at you. About the story you tell yourself. About who you are. And this is where it gets uncomfortably honest. Have you ever noticed that we tend to attract the same kind of relationship over and over? Different person, different city maybe, different circumstances, but somehow the same dynamic, the same push and pull, the same particular flavor of hurt. That's not coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. And patterns don't repeat randomly. They repeat because something in us recognizes them as asterisk familiar. Not comfortable necessarily, but familiar. There's a concept in psychology called the repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate situations that echo our earliest experiences of love. We're drawn to what feels like home, even when home was complicated, even when home had things in it. We're still trying to understand. So when that relationship mirrored something painful, when it made you feel unseen or unworthy, or constantly on the edge of being abandoned, it wasn't just doing something to you. It was showing you something you already believed about yourself. A belief that was probably written long before you met them, long before you were old enough to question whether it was true. And here is where I want to be very careful with words, because I am not saying that what happened to you was your fault. I am not saying you deserved it. I am not saying the other person's behavior was okay. What I'm saying is this: the way that relationship landed, the specific way it hurt you, was shaped by something already living inside you. A wound that predates them, a belief that was waiting for evidence. And that relationship, as painful as it was, gave you the clearest possible look at what that belief is, which means you now have something most people never get. a map to the exact place inside yourself that needs the most attention. Not punishment, not shame, the kind you give something you want to understand. At some point in that relationship, maybe early, maybe much later, there was something you didn't say, a feeling you swallowed, a boundary you didn't set, a truth you held back, because you were afraid of what would happen if you said it out loud. Maybe you were afraid of conflict. Maybe you were afraid of loss. Maybe you'd been taught, somewhere, somehow, by someone, that your feelings were too much, or not enough, or simply not worth the disruption. So you stayed quiet, and the relationship continued with a version of you that was edited, curated, safe. And the thing about showing up as an edited version of yourself is that it feels like protection. But what it actually does is make genuine connection impossible. Because the person who loves the edited version, they love something that isn't entirely real. And the person being edited, you spend the whole relationship half convinced that if they really knew you, all of you, they would leave, which means the love never quite lands. Because some part of you is always waiting for the moment they find out that relationship was pushing on something very specific. Your relationship with your own voice. Your belief that what you feel is worth expressing. That your needs are worth numbing. That asking for what you want doesn't make you difficult. It makes you honest. And here is the devastating irony. By not using your voice, by making yourself smaller, to keep the peace or keep the person, you didn't save the relationship. You just lost yourself inside it. And so when it ended, part of the grief wasn't just about them. It was about the version of you that disappeared while you were trying to hold it together. The lesson was this: your voice is not the problem. Your voice is the solution. Learning to use it. Not perfectly, not without fear, but learning to use it anyway. That is the real work that comes after. We've talked about what you needed, what you believed, and what you silenced. But there's one more lesson. And honestly, it's the one that takes the longest to arrive. The one you can't force or rush. But when it does arrive, when you finally understand this last thing, the whole story changes. Not just the story of that relationship, the story of you. Here's something I want you to sit with. You loved someone with your whole self. Not halfway, not carefully, fully. You showed up. You tried. You gave things you didn't even know you had to give. And it still ended. Now most people take that fact and use it as evidence that love isn't worth it, that opening up leads to damage, that the lesson is don't do that again. But I want to offer you a completely different reading. What if the lesson isn't you gave too much? What if the lesson is look how much you're capable of? Think about that for a second. You loved someone through doubt, through conflict, through your own fear, through nights you weren't sure. You stayed present, even when it was hard. You chose over and over to try again. That isn't weakness. That is an extraordinary capacity for love. And yes, it was pointed at someone who, for whatever reason, couldn't receive it fully, or couldn't match it, or wasn't ready, or simply wasn't right. But the capacity itself, that's yours. It didn't leave with them. the person you become after a loss like this. If you do the work, if you sit with the questions, instead of running from them, that person loves differently, not less, better, with clearer eyes, with more honesty, with less performance and more presence, with the hard-won knowledge of what you actually need, not what you thought you needed, not what you were taught to want, but what genuinely feeds you. At the deepest level, that kind of love, the love you're capable of now. After everything, very few people ever find their way to it. Most people get hurt and build walls and call it wisdom. But some people, the ones who are willing to stay curious about their own pain, they come out the other side with something rare, the ability to love, with their eyes open. Let me bring all of this together. That relationship, the one that broke you open, was teaching you 4 things. It was showing you the unmet need you'd been carrying long before you met them, the hunger that was never really about them. It was holding up a mirror to the story you believed about yourself, about whether you were worthy, whether you were enough, whether love was something you had to earn, or something you simply deserved. It was silencing you, deliberately, repeatedly, until the silence became so loud, you had no choice but to finally hear the voice you'd been suppressing, your own, and it was demonstrating, through loss, through grief, through all of it, the depth of what you carry, the size of your heart, the extraordinary fact that you are capable of loving someone that completely. Voice slows, each word deliberate. None of that was wasted. Not a single night. Not a single argument. Not a single moment of waiting by your phone, or going over conversations in your head, or wondering what you could have done differently. All of it was the education. The most expensive, most painful, most personal education you will ever receive. And what you do with it, that's where your story actually begins. I want to end tonight with something that isn't advice. I just want to say, if you're in the middle of this, if the ending is still raw, if you're still in that gray flatness, or still startled by reminders, you don't need to rush to the lesson. The lesson will find you. You don't need to perform healing for anyone, including yourself. You don't need to be grateful yet for something that still hurts. You are allowed to grieve fully without a timeline. But while you're grieving, while you're quiet and still and trying to remember who you were before all of this, pay attention, because underneath the pain, there's information. Specific, personal, irreplaceable information about what you need, what you believe, what you've been silencing, and what you're capable of. And that information, that is the gift, the one you would never have asked for, the one that cost more than you wanted to pay, the one that will make every future relationship, with others and with yourself, different in the best possible way. You didn't survive that for nothing. You survived it because something in you already knew what was coming next. And I think somewhere quietly, so do you. I want to end tonight with something that isn't advice. I just want to say, if you're in the middle of this, if the ending is still raw, if you're still in that gray flatness, or still startled by reminders, you don't need to rush to the lesson. The lesson will find you. You don't need to perform healing for anyone, including yourself. You don't need to be grateful yet for something that still hurts. You are allowed to grieve fully without a timeline. But while you're grieving, while you're quiet and still and trying to remember who you were before all of this, pay attention. Because underneath the pain, there's information. Specific, personal, irreplaceable information about what you need, what you believe, what you've been silencing, and what you're capable of. And that information, that is the gift, the one you would never have asked for, the one that cost more than you wanted to pay, the one that will make every future relationship, with others and with yourself, different in the best possible way. You didn't survive that for nothing. You survived it because something in you already knew what was coming next. And I think somewhere quietly, so do you. If this reached something in you tonight, if something shifted even slightly, I want you to share this with one person, not as a message, just as a quiet way of saying, I thought of you, I think you need this too. That also is a form of love. Subscribe if you want to keep having conversations like this. Every week we come back here, to this quiet space, and we talk about the things that don't fit into everyday conversation. And next week we're talking about how to stop looking for yourself in other people. Because after everything we talked about tonight, that is exactly where we go next. I'll see you there.